So I'm going to start with food. It's the first chapter in the book. I think if I were rereading this book now, since I spent most of the last 2 years studying mental health, I might put mindset first, but that probably just reflects where I'm kind of at in my journey. So I think food is one that's a lovely place to focus because it's changeable. Most people have at least a little bit of control over what they eat, maybe a lot of control over what they eat. And you can kind of see immediate impacts. So this is the first bright spot in the book. It's probably the one that's had the biggest impact on me as a person with diabetes. And, you know, it reflects this ideology around the time I was diagnosed, which was in 2001. We were told, just eat whatever you want, count the carbs, and just take the insulin for it. And that was at a time where there was no CGM, but I have tried to replicate that experience in different kind of head-to-head experiments of trying different diets and seeing what works for me. And I think what that resulted in was a lot of off-roading and a lot of effort just to try to stay on the road. And that was a lot of work. And having days like this on the left where you're kind of bouncing up and down, it does really feel like diabetes is running your life. And it's super frustrating to be kind of bouncing around like that. And what I sort of evolved and moved to is on the right, which is, how do I find a more cruise control way of eating that keeps me on the road and requires less effort? Because that's something I'm actually going to stick to. What that is kind of encapsulated or summarized for me is eating less than 30 grams of carbs at one time is really helpful on that front. And depending on your background, depending on your experience, depending on what you believe, people have reactions to this. So that's totally valid. I'm not saying this works for everyone, but for me, this has been pretty transformative and really valuable for just simplifying my life with diabetes. And what I like about it is that this is not all or nothing. So I'm not saying eat less than 30 grams at every meal for the rest of your life. I'm saying the more times at individual meals, the more times that I do this, the better my results seem to be. And for people who are eating, say 400 grams of carbs per day, just doing this at one meal can be transformative. So just doing this at breakfast can be a fabulous way to start the day. And I especially hear this from parents who are like, well, my kid's not going to eat low carb. And I say, well, what about once a day? What about one meal a day? Is that doable? And that, I think, is a different conversation than we often have on this topic. So this is some of my data on this. I have very mixed feelings about sharing my own data the more that I kind of progress in this field, because I think sometimes it can serve as a comparison. And I'm not sure comparison I don't think is that helpful for a lot of people, because it can make them feel really rotten about how things are going. So I share this with kind of a little bit of apprehension, a little bit of mixed thoughts, because on the one hand, I want to show that what I am talking about works for me. And I think data is a good way to do that. On the other hand, it doesn't work for everyone. And if it makes someone feel kind of bad about how they're doing, I don't think that's helpful. So I want you to kind of hold that as I take you through this. This is 90 days of CGM data. I pulled this in February, but you'll see in a couple slides how consistent this approach seems to be. And I think it's really good at keeping things on the road. And so if you remember back to that road graphic, spending a lot of time on the road, spending much less time kind of immediately off the road, and then spending almost no time at the extremes. And of course, all of those things are interrelated, because the more time you spend at the extremes, the harder it is to get back on the road. And so this is why I stick to this. This is why I share my experience with it, because it does seem to work pretty well. And this is the same 90 days, just looking at kind of what does a full 24-hour AGP look like. And it's really darn consistent, and it takes less effort, which is kind of the dual thing that I care about. So does it keep me in range, and can I sustain it, the effort? And it seems like that is the case. This is now trending 6 years of my time in range. This goes back to when I was wearing the Dexcom G5 when Clarity started capturing everything automatically. And you can see that my time in the 70 to 180 range for 6 years now has been pretty darn consistent. I mean, it bops a little bit around 90 to 95%, but you know, this isn't only about eating low carb, but I think that would be the one strategy that I think I would have to pick if I could only pick one to say that makes the biggest difference for me. So that's a little bit of my data on that. I find it helpful. Again, not trying to say it's for everyone, but that's kind of my approach to it. You know, folks often want to know, well, what do you eat? How do you even do that? And I do think it requires a little bit of creativity. I think sometimes it can be more expensive. So that is a downside. I talk in the book about eating chia pudding, which is a really kind of helpful breakfast strategy. I try to fill half my plate with vegetables. I use a lot of almond flour. Like that's an almond flour pizza I made. Those are almond flour waffles. Replacing things like potatoes and rice and pasta with veggies is really helpful. I eat lots of giant salads like that one. Those are some low carb tortillas that I really like. They're made by Tortilla Factory, and I'm a big fan of those for all sorts of uses. Things like riced cauliflower, riced broccoli are also really helpful. So I do think there's a lot of creativity that's possible in this eating approach that can sometimes not be part of the conversation. This is kind of another behavioral thing to think about in eating, but is, you know, how do you fill half your plate with vegetables? I mean, I think the more I do that, the better the results I get. And that picture on the left is from Disneyland, actually. I was at one of those, you know, snack bar stands, and I said, hey, you know, instead of the potatoes and rice, can I just get extra veggies? And that just reflects my own experience that it's easier to have willpower when ordering the food than when the food is in front of me. So if I had just gotten the chicken and they had brought the chicken and half a plate of potatoes, I would have eaten some of the potatoes, might have eaten all of them. However, when I order, I say, hey, can I replace the potatoes with veggies? I'm just sort of taking that diabetes landmine off the table, literally. And that's really helpful. This is an app that I like just for tracking meals with pictures, and it overlays your CGM data. It's called Under My Fork. And yeah, I played with it for a while. I think it's a good app for folks who are just kind of getting acquainted with CGM and meals and the impact. And yeah, it allows you to just snap a photo and it overlays the CGM data, and that's helpful. Okay, so that's a lot of food related bright spots. Here's I think a classic diabetes landmine in my book. And this is this experience of having a low blood sugar and then eating way too much food to correct it, because lows are so unpleasant and you get so hungry, and you just want it to be over. Or this idea of, well, I'm low, so I can have a treat. I can treat myself. So how do we overcome that diabetes landmine? And this is an experience I share in the book, which is, at this point, I was living with roommates, and my roommate worked at Google and would often bring home tons of free food. And on this particular day, there was a massive bowl of granola in the fridge, a huge bowl of granola just sitting there. You open the fridge, like, oh, you know, bowl of granola right there. And I remember going, you know, you can see from the chart, I went to bed at, say, 90 or 95 milligrams per deciliter, woke up at 1:45 a.m., really low there on the left side. And I went to that fridge and opened it, you know, at 1:45 in the morning, and ate just a few handfuls of granola. It felt like only a little bit at the time. And of course, you know, what you might expect would happen, which is I went back to bed and then spiked massively overnight. And then of course I was starting my day at 265, which is not a fun start to the day. Like, I haven't slept well because my blood sugar has been high all night. So I'm already grumpy. I tend to get grumpy when my blood sugar is high. So that's sort of another layer. And I'm more insulin resistant in the morning. And when my blood sugar is high, I'm doubly insulin resistant. And so of all the times to kind of wake up to be at 265, like 6 a.m. is not a great one for sure. So what's kind of the source of the problem here? You know, for me, it goes back to that hypoglycemic binge. Like, how do I avoid doing that? How do I build some guardrails so that doesn't happen? And for me, it's been this multi-pronged approach. One is have these go-to automatic low corrections. So I think it's helpful if they're quantity limited and I'm just not going to overeat them. And that, whatever that automatic thing is, that's my thing for lows. And that's how I fix my lows. And then I tend to think about correcting lows just like I would dosing insulin for highs. So what is my dose of carbs for low blood sugars? So I just know from my own experience, like one glucose tab, I choose glucose tabs not because they're tasty, but because they're quantity limited and I won't overeat them. I've also used Smarties a lot. I think Smarties are a great one too. And I just know like one glucose tab raises me 20 points, which is just such a helpful metric to have in mind, because then I can dose carbs appropriately based on the situation. So if I'm at 60 milligrams per deciliter, like that's probably a 2 glucose tab dose that I need. If I'm at 60 and dropping, I might need 3. If I'm at 60 and dropping and on a bike ride, I might take 4. And so this idea of like dosing carbs to correct lows has been really, really helpful for me. And that's my way of building guardrails to avoid this diabetes landmine that, you know, just happens to all of us because lows are so unpleasant. Okay, I'll zip through a few more food ones that I think are important, sometimes not talked about as much. This is more has to do with the timing of food. And so this is an example of eating a really big low carb dinner, like multiple plates of homemade Caesar salad with, you know, homemade dressing, nuts, and chicken. Really, really fatty for sure. And you can see I went to bed actually kind of low and woke up again like in the 250 range. And that's just from all of that fat turning into glucose over many hours. Had I been on a closed loop system at this time, it would have handled this perfectly. However, I wasn't. And so you can see like that huge dinner late at night, even though it was low carb, kind of prompted this significant spike overnight. And the antidote to that for me has been kind of the converse, which is, you know, making dinner hopefully like a lighter meal or one of the latest meals of the day, trying to have dinner like 3 hours before bedtime, and then actually making dinner the last food of the day. So not snacking afterwards. And I think this becomes so much easier when someone is on closed loop, because then you don't feel handcuffed to eating every few hours to kind of stay out of lows. But if someone can kind of stick to this schedule, I think it just leads to much more consistent glucoses overnight. And this was before I was on closed loop, and I think is a good example of how that kind of works in practice. Couple more. Almond flour has been really helpful for me. You know, these waffles take, I make these a lot. I just made them yesterday, in fact. They take 7 minutes to make, and I make them with almond flour and eggs. They're great. That's almond flour bread, almond flour bagels. Again, I'm all about like how to be efficient, how to make things taste good, but also not spend my whole life managing diabetes, because I don't want diabetes to be my number one job in life. Shirataki noodles have been a fabulous addition to my toolkit. I don't actually talk about them in the book because I hadn't discovered them yet, but they are, I think, 2 grams of carbs per serving, and all of those carbs are from fiber, which is why it says 0 net carbs. And they take, you boil them for 2 minutes, you drain the package, you boil them for 2 minutes, and then you can put them in a soup, you can make bolognese with them, like do a pasta. And this has been an awesome way to have something that feels pretty close to pasta or ramen, but without the carbs of, you know, more traditional noodles. So I'm a big fan of those. And these are those tortillas that I really like that are also really low carb, like 5 or 6 grams of carbs per tortilla, and super low glycemic, and those work really well too. And this is, I think, just a lovely example of how difficult higher carb eating has been for me. Not saying for everyone, but for me. This is Greek yogurt, plain, unsweetened, berries, and an apple. And you can see, you know, I took the insulin 20 minutes before, ate that at 9:30 a.m. And this is really the challenge with matching the timing of things, because my blood sugar spiked to 250 and then dropped to 50. And I clearly, I just mistimed that insulin dose, and, you know, maybe other factors were responsible too, but this is that constant off-roading that I that I just wanted to get rid of. And I think I just got tired of playing this game, and I was just interested in finding a different approach. And so I think that example shows what that experience can be like. The book is free. That's intentional because, you know, I did it in my spare time, and we launched it on Diatribe. And I thought, you know, my goal here is to get it to as many people as possible. So it's free to download there. The audiobook is free on YouTube. On Amazon, it's $6, which is the cost pricing. So Diatribe and I don't make any revenue off of that. And we just want it to be accessible. You can get on the Diatribe email list at that link. That's also free. And yeah, just, you know, if I could leave you with 2 takeaways, I think one is just remember this, to not forget about bright spots. You know, everyone has strengths. Everyone has things that are working, even if they're small. And the other is, don't forget about how complicated it is to live with this disease, and remind your patients of that, because I think that can get lost sometimes. You're welcome to email me at this address. I don't check it that often, but I do check it. And yeah, those are the links for Diatribe.